A child should be safe in a father's arms. It's a simple statement, and it's a true statement. But Tim Jones' 5 children were not safe in his arms. Mira Gracie Jones, 8 years old, murdered by her father, August 28, 2014. Elias Jones, her brother, 7 years old, murdered by his father with his hands. Natan Jones, 6 years old, killed at his father's hands, August 28, 2014. Gabriel Jones, 2 years old, killed at his father's hands, August 28, 2014. And the baby Abigail, 1 year old, murdered by her father, August 28, 2014. A child should be safe in a father's arms. Thursday, August 28, 2014 was a normal day. Started off normal for the Jones family. Mr. Jones was divorced from the mother of the children, Amber. He had custody of the children. He lived in Red Bank. He worked at Intel as a validation engineer. A good job. The 3 oldest went to Saxgotha Elementary School, and he took them there and he dropped them off. The 2 youngest, the 2 babies, went to a babysitter. And it was a normal day. After work, he picked up his children. He picked up the 3 from an after-school program, the Boys and Girls Club at Saxgotha Elementary, and he picked up the 2 babies from the babysitter, and they went home. That's the last time the children were seen alive. It was when they left school and they left the babysitter. It was a Thursday night. The only other thing we know, and you'll hear testimony for sure, of one of those children being alive was from Amber, the mother. There was a telephone call early that night, 7, 8 o'clock, and you'll hear the exact time. She will tell you that she heard the defendant, the father of the children, in a rage, screaming and yelling at the middle child, Natan, the 6-year-old, on speakerphone with the mother, and she could hear it, screaming at him about electrical outlets being blown, saying, "You could have killed yourself, son. You could have killed yourself, son." Amber didn't hear anything more. Then she got into a conversation with the defendant, and he hung up on her. And that was the last time the children were known to be alive. Friday the 29th, children don't go to school. They don't go to the babysitter. It's Memorial Day weekend, that Monday. The children don't show up to school on Tuesday. On Wednesday, the police start to get involved. The principal from Saxgotha calls law enforcement and asks for a welfare check. She and law enforcement go over to the Jones residence in Red Bank. No children are present. No Tim Jones is present. And no Cadillac Escalade, which is the car that he drove, is there. The same day, the defendant's father, Tim Jones Sr., called law enforcement and asked them to help him find his son and the grandchildren. Based on that, law enforcement begins to look. They contact Amber. They talk about when she last had contact with the children, what she's heard, if she's had contact with Tim Jones and what he said. Based on all of that information, the Lexington County Sheriff's Department entered all 5 children and the defendant and his vehicle and license plate in what they call NCIC, which is a National Crime Information Center. That way, if those children's names pop up in some other place or his name, it would alert the Lexington County authorities. That was on the 3rd, which was Wednesday. Saturday, September 6, 2014, at about 9 o'clock, Tim Jones, driving his Escalade, is stopped at a traffic safety checkpoint in Smith County, Mississippi. He is arrested for driving under the influence and possession of synthetic cannabinoids. The children are not with him, and the car smells like death. He's taken into custody, and over the course of a few days, he's interviewed, and ultimately he leads the police to the bodies of his children. Each one wrapped in a garbage bag on the side of the road in the middle of nowhere. He's charged with 5 counts of murder. He's pled not guilty by reason of insanity, as you heard Your Honor say. For you all to find that, you have to find that the defense has proved to you by a preponderance of evidence that when he killed his children, he did not understand the legal right from the legal wrong or the moral right from the moral wrong at the time he killed his children. They're going to do that by presenting experts. And I'm expecting you'll hear testimony from a bunch of experts to tell you pieces and parts about why he's not responsible. Maybe it's because somehow of him using the drugs. So voluntary drug use isn't an excuse. Maybe it's because he had a traumatic brain injury because he had a car wreck when he was a kid. Maybe they're going to say he has some kind of mental illness. But even if any of those are true, even if you believe any of those, that doesn't mean he's insane. That's not insanity. There's more to it. Every expert, I ask you all to think about 2 questions when they're testifying, whether they're ours or whether they're the defense. Is that expert searching for the truth? Are they trying to give you the truth, or are they looking for a defense or an excuse? Ask those hard questions in your head. Listen to their answers. Is the information they're providing you, is it coming from verifiable facts, things we know, things we can see, or is it only coming from what Tim Jones tells them? Those are the 2 things I ask that you all remember every time an expert testifies. You'll also hear from a court-appointed independent psychiatrist from the state. He'll tell you that Tim Jones was sane. He knew right from wrong when he killed his children. You'll hear from people who knew him and saw him, and they'll tell you what they observed of his behavior. The state has a burden of proving murder. The unlawful killing of another with malice aforethought. Killing of another with malice. And the judge will tell you all what malice is. It can be hostility, it can be hatred, it can be ill will, it can be a wicked or depraved spirit, an evilness in your heart. That's what you're looking for, and that's what we have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt to you. How are we going to do that? How are we going to prove to you that he had evil in his heart and evil on his mind when he killed those children? It'll be from the words that he told the police, and listen for the truth in the words. It'll be his actions in killing and how he killed his children. It'll be the fact that he ran and he tried to hide. It'll be in the way that he thought of to dispose the bodies of his children and how he actually did. It'll be in his deception of the way he lies to people to cover up his crimes. It'll be his thoughts. You'll actually get to see his thoughts in his cell phone because it recorded his web searches, his internet history, and you'll get to see what he was doing and what he was thinking about, starting on the 28th until the time he was caught. You're also going to see it on a clipboard that was found with writing in the car when he was stopped by the police in Mississippi. A detailed list of how he planned to dispose of his children's bodies. You'll see evidence of malice. Be on the lookout for it. Every time Tim Jones made a choice, starting on August 28, 2014, with his son Natan, it was all about him. What was going to happen to Tim Jones? How was it going to affect him? What did he need to do to protect himself? No thoughts for his children. He killed a 6-year-old child in a rage. Six years old. What could he have done to deserve to be killed?
You may.
A 6-year-old child. The words of Tim Jones, he PT'd his son. Physical training. We don't know the truth, that's what he says. Push-ups, squats, jumping jacks, whatever that entails, 45 minutes to an hour. And he sends him to bed. He says he goes to check on him and he collapses in his arms. He also tells the police that he put his hands on him. Natan Jones, 6 years old, died at his father's hands in a fit of rage. Malice? It's for you to decide. Did Tim Jones, when he saw his son collapse, did he call 911? Did he call for help? No. He did. Did he call the children's mom and tell her? No, he didn't. Did he call his father? No. Did he call anyone? No. What he did was he thought, I'm screwed. No one's going to believe this is an accident. And what did he do next? He strangled his son, Elias, 7 years old, to death with his bare hands. He strangled his daughter, Mira, 8 years old, with his hands. He took a belt to the baby's crossing their throats and taking the life away from them, and strangled both of them, Gabe and Abigail, to death. He knew what he did was wrong. That's why he didn't call 911. He knew what he did was wrong. That's why he ran. He ran to try and save himself. And he hated his ex-wife so much that he killed the children so she'd never get to see him again. A child should be safe in a father's arms. A father is supposed to love his children. Tim Jones loved himself more. A father is supposed to protect his children. Tim Jones was worried about protecting himself more. Timothy Ray Jones Jr. is not a father. He killed his 5 innocent children. He did it with malice, with an evilness in his heart. He's not insane. He's a murderer. Thank you.
That's yes, sir.
You can't judge the health of a forest by only looking at a few trees. You can't judge the health of a forest by only looking at a few trees. I've got a friend who works at the Forestry Commission. He always says, you can't judge the health of a forest by only looking at a few trees. That is what the state is going to ask you to do in this trial, is to just look at a few trees. They're not going to ask you to look at the seeds that the forest was planted with. They're not going to ask you to test the soil to see if the foundation of that forest is poor. They're not going to ask you to go to the right and see that disease has decimated the forest. They don't want you to go to the left and see that kudzu has overtaken that part of the forest, destroying it. They certainly don't want you to sniff the air, because you might get a whiff of smoke and realize that the back of that forest is on fire. You heard the judge say that Tim has pled not guilty by reason of insanity. Now, it's not a defense that Tim picked out, like when you were in voir dire and the judge read you a list of defenses. That is a defense that the lawyers, in consultation with experts, a full examination of Tim and a review of his family history. Tim has schizophrenia, something he wasn't diagnosed with prior to his arrest. Tim's mind is broken. In deciding whether Tim knew the legal or moral right from wrong, you need to look at the full forest, not just a few trees. Tim was genetically loaded for mental illness. Children come into this life with genetic predispositions. Some genes determine your hair and your eye color. Other genes can influence diseases, such as diabetes or heart disease. Other genes can determine vulnerability to psychiatric conditions, such as addiction, bipolar disorder, or schizophrenia. Tim's mom has schizophrenia. She has been institutionalized for the last 2 decades. You will hear about major mental illness on both the paternal and the maternal side of Tim's family. The seeds for Tim's brain weren't healthy. You will hear about Tim's environment. The ability to have a healthy brain, that development can be hurt. his development of his brain was negatively impacted by his environment. You will hear from numerous witnesses about his childhood, about the violence, the substance abuse, the mental illness, and the abandonment that he was constantly subjected to. You will gain an understanding from experts as to how an environment such as that can damage the foundation of someone's mind. In other words, Tim's forest was grown in bad soil. You will hear how a genetically at-risk and a negatively impacted brain was further damaged by a traumatic brain injury. Tim suffered a traumatic brain injury when he was a teenager, when he was in a car accident. You're going to hear from experts. You're going to actually see scans of the damage. You are going to hear about the frontal lobe damage that still exists today, the blood that's still there. You will actually see the divot that's still in his skull all these years later from a depressed skull fracture. Tim's unhealthy seeds that were grown in bad soil were damaged by a traumatic brain injury. And all of this was through no fault of his own. You will hear that when Tim was a teenager, he started using mood-altering substances to deal with that emotional instability. Exposure to sustained emotional trauma, head injuries, and substance abuse can have an effect on the developing brain. As Tim's forest developed, it was malnourished, without an understanding of the later devastating impacts that this might have. Despite all these problems, Tim was determined to make something of himself. He joined the Navy. He wanted to be a Navy SEAL. After a month and a half, he was separated in boot camp for a depressive disorder, a mental health disorder that was diagnosed by the United States Navy. Tim was devastated. He went back to using drugs and alcohol. He got in trouble, and he went to prison. In prison, he found religion. To Tim, the love of Jesus was unconditional. It helped soothe his emotional instability and his feelings of abandonment. To Tim, the Bible is the literal and infallible guide on how to live your life. The answers to all questions can be found in the Bible, no matter how extreme those views can be. Scripture was a way for Tim to try to gain control of his life. He has a phenomenal memory. He can memorize vast amounts of Scripture. But his social and emotional abilities are such that even though he could read that Scripture, he couldn't understand it for its meaning or its meaningful application. Once Tim got out of prison, he met Amber McCauley. They both worked at a place called the Enchanted Castle in Chicago. It's a place very similar to Frankie's Fun Park. It was love at first sight, and they got married months later. They moved around for a little bit, but they eventually followed Tim's dad down to Mississippi. Tim started working down there and going to school, supporting Amber. Tim was good at school, specifically math and computers. Those trees in his forest were good. They had their first daughter, Mira, followed a year later by their son, Elias. The following year after that, they had their son, Natan. Tim transferred from a community college to Mississippi State, where he graduated summa cum laude. Tim enjoyed school, but he loved his wife and he loved his children. He got good enough grades that he was offered a job with Intel in South Carolina, and so they moved. Once they moved here, they had their son, Gabriel. If you talk to the people at Intel, they can't tell you a lot about Tim's personal life, except for his children. Intel was over in Blythewood, but Tim moved his family to a trailer in Leesville, intent on homesteading, where they had 30 chickens, 4 geese, 3 ducks, 3 rabbits, 2 turkeys, 2 dogs, and a number of cats. Amber was going to homeschool the children, even though she never graduated from high school. Intel can be a tough place to work, with high stress and long hours. You'll hear about Tim's strict observance of the scripture. To Tim, it wasn't spare the rod, spoil the child. It was that the rod is love. They are regular attendees to Sunday services, where Tim often would speak in tongues in church. And you will hear about their nightly Bible studies at home. Not long after moving to South Carolina, Tim suspected Amber was having an affair with a neighbor. She was pregnant with their last daughter, Elaine. Soon after that, they separated. Tim's forest was devastated. The emotional instability and abandonment from his youth came back. Amber agreed that Tim was better suited to raise the children, so Tim got custody. Initially, the children went to live with Tim's dad and stepmother in Mississippi. Tim would leave Intel on Friday night, drive all the way to Mississippi, turn around on Sunday, drive back to South Carolina, arriving at Intel Monday morning to start his job. Tim would utilize babysitters to help him with the children. Tim knew that there was a problem. But Tim did not want to be like his mother, institutionalized. That is a fear that he had always had. He's a man. He thought he could fix himself. You'll hear about how he went to a counselor and how he sent the kids to a separate counselor because he loved them and because he was worried about growing up without a mother, how that would affect him if their mother wouldn't be in their everyday life as it affected him. Tim began to self-medicate himself. He started using drugs and alcohol. In 2014, in May, he started using synthetic marijuana or spice. Tim felt like it was an antipsychotic and an antidepressant all rolled up in one, but it was just masking the problems. Struggling to juggle his job, his kids, and the emotional devastation of his wife's adultery. Tim's forest had been held together for 10 years by the love of his wife, his abstinence from drugs and alcohol, his children, his job, and religion. That all came crashing down at the same time. You will hear about in the summer of 2014 how Tim took the kids to Disney World. He was trying to hold it together. He was trying to be a good father, to get his kids to love him the way the Bible told him they would. He knew something was wrong. He was trying to fix himself. You're going to hear about his purchases on Amazon, self-help books, religious books. You'll hear about ways that he was trying to make money off the internet. Spending $4,000 on a how to be a millionaire when he didn't even have the money. You'll hear how he applied to St. James Medical School in the Caribbean and was accepted. Applied in July, accepted in August. One of his co-workers asked, "What are you going to do for money?" Tim wasn't concerned. The Lord would take care of him. The disease in Tim's forest was getting worse. Tim's work was deteriorating. Co-workers at Intel saw that he was missing days, that he was losing weight, and he had started smoking. There had always been a divide in Tim's functioning. You had this academic side where he could perform, achieve, and be an expert. Those trees were good, but he always struggled with the social and emotional life. You'll hear how his paranoia was growing, how there's prolific internet searches at all hours, how he thought Amber was being prostituted, how he thought his kids were colluding with DSS, how Natan had a suspicious fascination with electricity. The children's behavioral issues that were a normal product of a stressful divorce, to him, was a failure of faith. He must not be doing what the Bible told him to do, because if he was, it would all be good. Does this sound like a man who had a healthy forest? On August 28th of 2014, Tim picked up the kids from the Boys and Girls Club at Saxcoffel, the 3 oldest ones. He picked up the 2 younger ones from daycare at the neighbors and brought them home, and he fed them. At some point in time, he became convinced that Natan had intentionally blown the outlets. He began exercising him, trying to find out what the truth was. Tim was unsuccessful in getting what his delusional belief of the truth was out of Natan. For reasons that are still unknown to this day, we don't know why Natan died. Tim's forest was on fire. It was burning out of control. Over the next couple of hours, he did strangle each of his children. He wrapped them in sheets and blankets and placed them in his Cadillac Escalade, where they stayed for 9 days. He wasn't ready to let them go. He thought that that was his way of spending time with them. He even played them songs. You'll hear about his disorganized driving pattern to Bishopville, Camden, Spartanburg, Folly Beach, Charleston, Mississippi, Georgia, Alabama. It's a man who didn't have a healthy forest. You'll hear eventually how Tim was on a country highway in Alabama and he pulled off onto a logging road. He tried to cut off one of Natan's legs. It's one of the many notions that the voices told him and that he wrote down. He couldn't bring himself to do it. He took the remains and placed them in garbage bags. He said a prayer and he said goodbye. He was stopped at a safety checkpoint in Mississippi later that same day. Since Tim's arrest, he has been diagnosed with schizophrenia, a major mental disease. You will not hear testimony from anyone who says that when Tim killed his children, that he wasn't psychotic. Even the state psychiatrist. You will hear how over the last 4 years, the state of South Carolina has given Tim a variety and a plethora of psychotropic medications. But they want you to believe that his forest is fine. They want you to look at a few trees, not the entire forest. Tim's forest was diseased, decimated, and burning. He had a few good trees, but they don't want you to see the whole forest. On August 28th of 2014, because of a mental disease or defect, Tim could not appreciate legal or moral right from wrong. After you hear all the evidence, you'll find Tim not guilty by reason of insanity. Not guilty by reason of insanity.